Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Coming up on our show today, it can be an uncomfortable topic, but how do you talk to your kids about sex? Sexual health educator Saleema Noon will be here to offer advice about having frank discussions with your family. But first, it's less than 2 months until our provincial election, and Premier David Eby is here, and he's taking your calls. Tell us what the biggest concerns are for you. Call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Our lines are open. I'm Amy Bell, and this is BC Today. And good afternoon. We're just waiting for Premier Eby to connect with us. In the meantime, he will be here to address your comments. You can ask him your questions at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email your comments, bctoday@cbc.ca. And taking a look at our other top story, it has been just over 12 hours since the rail stoppage was announced. Both CN Rail and CPKC have locked out their workers, and negotiations failed to reach a settlement. Conductors, engineers, and rail workers are among the 9,300 picketers across the country. The Teamsters Union and the two companies are still far apart on several issues, and the Prime Minister says, quote, the economy is at risk. In Metro Vancouver, service on the West Coast Express is suspended. The line runs on tracks owned by KPKC, so without traffic controllers to dispatch them, passenger trains cannot run on those rails. Rick Evans is a rail consultant and the president of DRE Transportation Solutions. He told CBC's Daybreak South that even if you don't see rail lines in your part of BC, you'll likely still notice the impact.
Rail does not come directly to Kelowna. However, many shipments come part way by rail and then finish the trip in a container or a trailer, for example. And that's how the impact will occur. You don't see it firsthand as a train going by in the Okanagan, but the containers will have come from a railway in many instances, particularly if you look at something like Canadian Tire. Most of their business moves at least one leg by rail. That will be impacted.
And we are now joined by Premier Eby. Premier Eby, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time with us today. We're obviously less than 2 months away from the election, and affordable housing remains one of the biggest, if not the biggest, concern for many. You spoke last hour in North Vancouver about how your government is continuing to address this through the Homes for People Action Plan. So what do you want people to know about the work being done?
Well, thanks for asking. Today in North Vancouver, out front of an older rental building. These are the kinds of buildings that have been bought up by big investment trusts, mass eviction of tenants, and increase of rents. But this time, thanks to a $500 million provincial government fund that was created, it's been purchased by the nonprofit sector, so the tenants are protected, the building's being upgraded, and it will in future support those nonprofit organizations in buying additional rental buildings and getting them out of the private market system. There have been 1,500 units like this protected across the province as we started the fund, and it's only half used. And so we're hopeful another 1,500 units will be protected.
All right, and Premier, you've graciously agreed to answer some questions for our audience today. So I'd like to bring in Michael from North Vancouver. Hi, Michael. What's your question for Premier Eby?
Yeah, hello there, Mr. Premier. I know always the focus is on affordability for people purchasing a home or renters, but I'd like you to comment on the landlord or the owner side of things. And first of all, to buy a place, you have to pay a property transfer tax that goes straight to the government. I'm not sure how that helps affordability, but beyond that, as a landlord, we're restricted every year, between 2 and 3% to raise the rent. Property taxes keep increasing. interest rates, mortgage interest rates are anywhere between 5 and 7%. So somebody that owns a building or just one rental apartment and so forth, it no longer makes economic sense to keep this unit because we can't raise the rent to keep up with all the other costs, yet you believe the tenant shouldn't be subject to those increases that everybody else has to pay. So what choice does the landlord have then? They can sell the place, but I can tell you, $1 million condo in Vancouver or something, the average renter can't afford to buy. So they're not getting their hands on the property because the landlord is forced to sell. So I just wonder how this actually helps the rental population.
Thank you for that, Michael. Premier, I'll leave that to you to answer.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the balance between landlords and tenants is always an important one for government. If it goes too far in one direction or the other, there are consequences that follow, including potentially less rental housing or wildly out of control rent increases. So there are some people, and specifically the BC Conservatives under John Rustad, that are suggesting we should get rid of rent control. And we would see increases to rents of thousands of dollars a month, potentially, like they see in Ontario, where there's no rent control. We just don't think that's the right way. We think renters need predictability around rents, and the rental increases are tied to inflation. There was a brief period when we separated from that during the rampant inflation we saw just coming out of the pandemic. But we're back to it being inflation. And also, we've got programs to encourage people to become landlords by providing a grant to them so they can create a suite and rent it out. It is important work providing that housing. I'm glad that you do it. And also, we're trying to find a balance. A lot of people are squeezed with affordability who are renting. And thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll get to some more calls. But there's also been this huge push, targeting Airbnbs and eliminating those from the market to free up that housing. For many areas, the Okanagan, Vancouver Island, these aren't big companies that are buying up these properties to charge, exorbitant rates. These are people that are trying to perhaps make a living and to keep their heads above water. What do you say to those people that have invested in perhaps a singular Airbnb or using their homes or their laneway houses to try and keep their heads above water, feeling like this has now been taken away from them?
Yeah, I think, for myself and my family, we like staying at short-term rentals when we're on vacation. This is not an anti-short-term rental thing. People can have a short-term rental unit on their property. It could be a basement suite or a laneway house. The problem we have is that there have been people buying up entire homes and operating essentially hotel chains, buying up what used to be long-term rental properties or properties that people would buy for their families to live in. And so all of a sudden we have a situation where vacancy rates are below 1%. People can't find a place. People who work in these tourism dependent communities can't find a place to live. And they're competing with investors for that place to live. And we're going to prefer people that are looking for a place to live over investors every time. And we're also creating constructive ways for investors to create new housing. So for example, across the province, we've changed the rules to make sure that you can build more than one single family unit more than one unit on a single family lot. This means that if you have a place, you can split it into two and sell off the other half and bring in some income or rent it out if you want or whatever. And that is far more constructive for the housing crisis than having people compete with housing. I met Alex in Vancouver, who, because of our Airbnb rule changes, moved into a place that used to be a short-term rental. He works in Vancouver. This is happening across the province, tens of thousands of people finding a place to live because of that rule change. And once vacancy rates get back to a healthy level, then we'll be able to revisit this.
Okay. We'll bring in Tony now from Langdale. Hi, Tony. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. Thank you.
And what is your question today?
Premier Eby, my question and my concern is road safety on the Sunshine Coast. Since we moved here in 2016, the road safety has plummeted. And I understand there were challenges during the pandemic getting materials. I'm specifically thinking about painting lines on the road. It seems like a pretty simple thing, but there are all kinds of areas on Highway 101 that have no center line and no shoulders, no lines on the shoulders. And you probably know about a horrific motorcycle accident in 2020 where somebody lost their life because the driver mistook the deteriorated center line as a passing line. And certainly in front of the street that I live on, that was resurfaced about 3 years ago, we still have no center line and no shoulder lines. And this is an area where school children have to cross every 5 days a week, of course, during the school season. So, road safety. It's a simple problem from my perspective. What's up?
Premier Eby.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, really good question. There haven't been substantive changes in road maintenance budgets or contractors, as to the best of my knowledge, on the Sunshine Coast. So I'll take that back to the Ministry of Transportation and get some answers for you. I appreciate you drawing it to my attention.
Thanks for that, Tony. We'll check in now with Roman in Port Alberni. Hi, Roman. Hi, Roman. Are you there with a question for Premier Eby? We'll move on to Louise. Hopefully we can reconnect with Roman. Louise, what was your question for Premier Eby?
Hi there. Thank you very much, Premier Eby, for taking my question. I'm really concerned about the threat that to the democratic process, which the mayor and city council have seemed to be bringing up, trying to eliminate our elected park board without involving the voters and citizens, and talking about opening the charter and not involving the citizens. So I wanted to know what your thoughts and approach is to this concern about a wonderful park board that's done work for us for years, and the concern that it might just be eliminated without any input from the citizens.
Mm-hmm. Premier Eby.
Yeah, thanks, Louise, for the question. I know that the park board is close to the hearts of a lot of people in the city. A couple of our MLAs actually served on the park board before being elected to provincial politics. It is a really good way to connect local communities to how parks are operated. I'll confess I have had some concerns about interactions the province has had with the park board in relation to encampments. And we lost, unfortunately, the Point Grey Fiesta this year in my home community because of what struck me as a misunderstanding between the park board and our volunteers in the community. And we've had some challenges around the showboat, which is a concrete stage next to the pool, and finding some certainty for that following a fire. So I think there's definitely room for improvement and space for improvement in how the park board operates. I'll say the mayor has made his commitment that he wants the park board removed. There's been a vote at city council. The province is committed. We will work with the city on that. It brings in a bunch of implications that need to be sorted out around the various parks and covenants that are on the properties, and other things that have to be worked through that are bureaucratic and challenging. But we've committed to do that work. There won't be any changes for the foreseeable future because we are going into the election period, and it would require a legislative change, a new law in Victoria, and we're some distance from that.
All right. Hope that answers your question. Appreciate that. And of course, you're welcome to join our conversation with Premier Eby. You can call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We're going to take a call now from Mark. You want to know about policy of government for seniors.
Yes. Hello, Premier Eby. My name's Mark White, and I'm the volunteer chair with the Older Person and Elders Advisory Committee, and was really happy that the City of Vancouver has recently adopted a seniors housing strategy. And I was wondering whether the NDP is planning on developing a seniors housing strategy for the province in the coming term.
Thanks for that question, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for your work with the organization. I know there are a lot of seniors out there that are facing pressure around housing. I was with Steve today in North Vancouver, who lives in this building that was just bought by a nonprofit organization, and there were a number of seniors in that building that benefited from it. We have a housing plan for the province as a whole, including seniors. We have a number of senior-specific programs, including SAFER grants that we recently increased eligibility for. So just for seniors who are listening, if maybe you'd applied for a Save for grant before and you were disqualified because of income, check back in. You may qualify now. It's still a program that is not as substantial. And we're opening additional seniors across the province, including a dramatic increase in long-term care housing as seniors who have various disabilities that prevent them from living independently, that they're able to get the care they need, as well as home care to support people with health issues so they're able to stay at home. So it's an integrated approach with respect to seniors, but seniors housing will be a key point of discussion, I'm sure, during the election, including housing of all types across the province. And so I encourage your organization to put forward proposals for what you'd like to see from the various parties, mine own included. And because you're front lines, you're seeing what seniors are going through, and it's helpful information for us.
All right, thank you for that. Premier, if you don't mind, I've got a couple emails that have come in while we've been chatting, so I just want to give those to you. Grace writes, how are we going to fix this problem of housing people? My daughter has 2 children and they cannot find housing. How can a single parent who has a minimum wage job afford to live and where? And that is a sentiment we hear repeated from so many people, especially in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that message really summarizes the feelings that a lot of people have about housing right now, and not just in BC, across Canada and across North America. We've seen a real increase in rents and a lack of housing affordability. I think the epicenter, it feels like some days, is in British Columbia, as we're a very desirable place to live. We with our BC Builds program. What we're doing is we're actually building housing using publicly owned land, owned by municipalities, in some cases health authorities, school boards, First Nations, and others, and using expedited processes with local governments, getting rid of the red tape to get things built faster, and government's borrowing power to reduce the cost of financing the sites, to provide housing that is about 30% below market for middle-income households. We have a very significant social housing program for people that are living close to or at the poverty line or below. But this is something new, where we're building housing for middle-income people in the province, and it's something government used to do. You know, the government used to be involved in co-ops, and I think a lot of people could probably think of examples of that who are listening right now. The West End was built through middle-income housing, was built through government programs at the federal level. We are getting back into that business because the market is not providing the housing that people need, and we're leveraging public assets to be able to do it.
How does that play out in the future? I'll admit, as the mother to 2 teens, it's the reality that I do not know if my children will be able to find affordable housing, and they will be in a much better place than many of their peers. How do you sort of look to the future to ensure that people can stay in BC?
Yeah, it's vitally important. I could spend a huge amount of time going through the various initiatives we have around this, but it's everything around controlling speculation, but also getting as much housing built as possible, both rental housing and housing for purchase. We added 180,000 people to our province last year, and that number is a 30-year high, and it eclipsed last year's number, which was a 30-year high as well. So we have to be building a lot. We're building 4 times as much rental housing as, for example, Ontario is building. And we're starting to see the impact of that. So I was in North Vancouver today. Rents for all apartments are down about 11% year over year, and Vancouver down about 7%. We know that's down from, we know we're on the right track, but we have to really keep what we're doing, which is why I find it frustrating in this election that the major opposition parties are suggesting that we stop doing these programs, because we're just starting to show some traction on them.
Right. Fiona writes, I would like to hear from you about the last stands of our old growth forests. How will you protect them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think when we think about ourselves as British Columbians and what really defines the province, it's hard not to think about, especially coastal old growth cedar, the huge trees. We have provincial laws in place that protect those monumental trees in our province. We've also deferred old growth logging across the province. There have been consequences that flow from that, which includes impacts to forestry operations. But I think as British Columbians, we can agree that the forest industry that's built on logging old growth is not a sustainable long-term industry for the province. And we want a sustainable forest industry. So we've been working with the sector to retool so that they're able to use second and third growth trees instead, and to get more jobs per tree through our manufacturing jobs fund. The old growth is on the ballot for the upcoming election. Both the BC United and the BC Conservative parties have spoken out repeatedly in opposition to our old growth protection work across the province, and would go back to clear cuts. And I just don't think any British Columbian would stand for that.
Right.
At least I hope not. And we're going to protect them for our future, and we're going to make sure we have a sustainable forest industry going forward.
All right. Thank you for that. We'll bring in Sheena now from Victoria. Sheena, what's your question for Premier Eby?
Yes, hello, Premier Eby. The reason that rents are so outrageously unaffordable in British Columbia is because landlords are allowed to increase rents between tenants, so when someone moves out, to whatever they want. Now, you can't do anything about the fact that they're outrageously high now, but you can prevent these terrible increases by changing the law so that landlords are not allowed to increase rents between tenants. They are only allowed to have that once a year increase, and that will prevent this from happening in the future. Because if you don't prevent this now, this is just going to go on and on and on, and nobody can afford to live here. Employers cannot find employees. It's just a crazy situation. So change that one thing, and you will change that whole scenario. So why aren't you doing it?
Premier.
Thanks, Sheena, and a good and important question. We heard the landlord call before and say, with the rent control on tenants, I'm not having trouble ensuring that I can keep operating this rental building. And now we're hearing a tenant say, well, why don't you just ensure that that there's rent control on the building, and then regardless of who moves in. There are definitely two sides in this conversation around rental housing protection. The jurisdictions that have put in rent control by units, where they have had that as a policy for rental housing, have seen a collapse in the construction of new rental housing. And unfortunately, or fortunately, or what, I don't know what, but the reality is in British Columbia, we can't afford that. When you're adding 180,000 people a year, we have to massively build housing of all kinds, including and perhaps especially rental housing. And government can't do it all alone. We do need private sector rental housing to be built as well. And they've been very clear with us, and the evidence is shown in other jurisdictions that when rent control by unit is put in, it stops the construction of rental housing, which we just can't have in our province right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Amy writes in, my question for David Eby is why a person with disability funding is only slightly above 115 or 1,500 per month. It's not sustainable to live on.
Thanks for the question. We've done, I think, 3, maybe 4 increases to disability support. The federal government recently announced that they have an intention of increasing disability support, which we welcome, certainly, in the province. It is very challenging to live on disability or on social assistance in British Columbia. And we'll do our best to make sure that we're providing as much support as we can. And that's why we provided those increases, but it's also why we put additional programs in place around housing, supporting people with disabilities to get into subsidized housing, recognizing that one of the biggest expenses that makes it challenging to live on disability is housing. We've got almost 80,000 on-market units that have been constructed or in process and are funded since we formed government, and take the point that we got more to do on that.
And housing is such a key issue because it is connected to so many aspects of people's lives and what they can do going forward. Pete is calling us now from Trail. Hi, Pete.
It's Steve, actually, but that's okay.
Oh, Steve, sorry about that.
That's fine.
And what was your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, we have a large homeless crisis, and I feel like for communities on the coast, there might be a creative solution to house quite a few people, maybe not on a permanent basis, but at least temporarily. It might work on a permanent basis. But we were camping this weekend, and we were just brainstorming, and we thought, like, let's look up what the cost of a cruise ship might be, like for sale, and we found one that they were asking $33 million, but it has room for 2,800 guests, and it had been refurbished in 2015. And I thought, what if we docked that off Vancouver, Victoria? And that they're based on double occupancy usually, so that would probably translate into about 1,400 rooms. But I feel like if people qualified, if they weren't violent or anything, and that, you know, they have a lot of amenities and like a clinic and eating areas and kitchens, and if we had shore power and water, I don't think it would be out of the question on coastal communities to use something like that. So I was just wondering, like, it might not be a permanent thing,
Sure.
but even if you might be able to lease it or something for a while.
Well, and certainly, Pete, I thank you for that call. A lot of people are sort of looking outside the box for, solutions to this. Is it worth sort of, keeping our options open and maybe trying to think outside of the mainstream approaches that perhaps haven't been as successful in the past, or able to keep up at least?
Yeah, I think the sort of the attitude that Steve brings to this is one that I find a lot among British Columbians. People want solutions to it or think to create. And I've heard the cruise ship suggestions before, and actually, cruise ship is housing a whole bunch of workers on a major industrial site in Howe Sound. And in doing so, ensuring that they're not impacting the local housing market. So it is something that can and is working for some types of housing in the province. One of the, for homeless populations, one of the outside of the box approaches that has been successful that we've seen, for example, in Duncan and other are tiny homes where people have their own unit. They're not in a larger building with other neighbors that might have significant challenges, just a small group of homes together. And it's something that when we initially formed government, BC Housing it was not part of their agenda. And we've come a long way because it has shown that kind of success as people have their own units, are able to move from those into permanent housing once they stabilize. And so Steve, you other people, if you have creative suggestions around housing, we're always listening and looking for those opportunities. We're probably not going to buy that cruise ship, though, but I appreciate it.
I do appreciate that willingness to think, big, and to, friends sitting around coming up with some creative ideas. We have in the final moments, we have time for one last email. It's from Kienta, and she writes, "I'm interested to know how the provincial government will increase funding for public education."
Thanks. That's a great question, and we know, I mean, I got kids, I've got one in the school system. I got one going into kindergarten in September. And one of the things that I've seen, and a lot of parents have seen, is that their kids are particularly struggling at school. And what we're trying to do with education funding and additional funding for the schools is to provide additional support for those kids, whether it's school counselors or whether it's additional staff to be able to provide supports for kids that need extra attention so that the whole class isn't thrown off track by someone who's really struggling. But we're also wanting to make sure we don't lose track of those kids that aren't at that extreme high end. So around kids that are struggling with reading and writing, we just introduced funding for kids to make sure that every child in the province is screened twice for writing and for reading to identify early learning challenges that they might have, as well as additional funding for teachers to go and do professional development about how to support kids that are identified through this screening, just through their regular classroom teaching. This helps respond to things like dyslexia and dysgraphia, where kids are having trouble reading or writing, and can make a huge difference when we do it really early and we get kids back on track. Then we save a lot of money downstream in the school system when kids they don't like school anymore. They feel like they're not successful. They don't want to be there. They're disruptive because that intervention wasn't done earlier.
Absolutely. Premier Eby, I truly appreciate you taking the time with me, but especially with our audience today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for your patience. Glad we got connected there.
No worries. Take care. That was Premier David Eby. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and YouTube at CBC Vancouver. CBC News with Tim Weeks is next.
Good afternoon. BC politicians, businesses, and many commuters are calling for an end to the railway work stoppage. They're calling for federal action, saying the damage it's inflicting requires immediate attention. Teamsters and Canada's two largest rail companies are back at the bargaining table after labour negotiations broke down last night. Both railways have called for binding arbitration, which the union has so far rejected. People in Lillooet will have to leave the community today if they need emergency care. Interior Health announced yesterday it had extended the closure of the emergency department at the Lillooet Hospital. The ER was supposed to reopen this morning, but because of a lack of doctors, it now won't reopen until 8 tomorrow morning. And the number of active wildfires in BC has dropped below 350, with just 2 new starts over the last 24 hours. There's just one blaze that's now classified as a wildfire of note, the Coria Creek wildfire, just northwest of Smithers. A smoky skies bulletin remains in effect for the Peace, Williston, and Stewart and Chaco regions of northeastern BC. Taking a look at the weather for the North Coast, cloudy this afternoon with highs of 18. In the Peace, mainly sunny and 23. In the central interior, mainly sunny with a high of 23 as well. For the Boundary and Kootenay regions, a mixture of sun and cloud with highs of 26. In the Okanagan and southern interior, a mixture of sun and cloud with highs to 27. And for Metro Vancouver, Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mostly cloudy this afternoon with highs of 22. Now back to Amy Bell and BC Today.
Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and of course live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Now, on yesterday's show, we asked you if the government should step in to end the rail stoppage. William wrote, "No, we must be prepared to sacrifice in order to protect unions and the people that they represent. I've never been a member of a union, been exempt, enduring inconvenience to ensure the sanctity of the bargaining process. I suspect that neither the BC government nor the federal government want to intervene and only wish to remain respectful to the process and the people that unions serve." Tim weighed in with the Wednesday program Phone In revealed an interesting but not surprising phenomenon. Government haters calling for government action. Major business hypocrites called for the government to intervene to halt the rail stoppage. These are the organizations which resist and declaim government regulation and action, but are happy to call for action. One is tempted to cry for shame, but we know that these business organizations know no such thing. Randy said the administrators responsible for the labor negotiations saw this coming months ago, and we, the taxpayers, are now treated to another 11th hour Hobson's choice with serious consequences. Expect more of the same. Our systems and institutions have exploited and alienated too many workers, with the executive level of management drawing bonuses while income disparities grow. And we also talked about menopause and how there needs to be more education for an issue that impacts half the population. Val on Salt Springs shared, at 46, I started having hot flashes. 48, my last period. I'm 70 and still usually wake up to a hot flash. Sorry, but get used to it. Thanks to everyone. And parenting can be full of uncomfortable moments, and talking to your kids is no exception. Trust me on that one. But with kids able to access more and more sexualized content online and being exposed to it at increasingly younger ages, open discussion has never been more important. So we're asking, do you talk to your kids about sex? And what are your biggest concerns when it comes to children and sex? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email your questions to bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, joining us is sexual health educator Saleema Noon. Hello, thanks so much for coming in.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to be here. So, we have talked before in the past about these topics, but generally speaking, talking about the birds and the bees, it's not anything new, but the way in which we need to approach it has certainly drastically changed. What is an important thing that parents and guardians need to really remember when attempting to talk to kids about sex?
Oh, there's so much.
I get sweaty just thinking about it.
I know, right? Well, think back to when we were growing up. It was all about the talk.
The talk.
And I think that feels really daunting for parents today, to be able to know not only what to say, but how to say it and when. I think the best advice I have for parents is to take opportunities when they come up naturally to give our kids what I call little body science boosters.
Right.
One example is all of the great talking points that come up in the US election. You know, talk about IVF, talk about reproductive rights,
Yeah.
talk about things that we see in our everyday life to have those little snippets of conversations.
And I remember you saying that, and it is so important that, you know, you can't just sit them down and be like, well, we
need to talk.
We really need to talk about something. It's those little moments that can have a lot more meaning than just one specific talk, because you'll never cover it. You won't be done.
No.
I think my parents maybe thought so. I didn't really have the talk. My dad was a biology teacher, so I had
None of
access
us really
to some
did.
textbooks, and I had an older sister. But you know, there's no way you can cover it. But I wish there had been that openness. What are some of the benefits then, you know, to raising your child with that very open and welcoming attitude towards talking about sex and the issues around it?
Well, there are lots. I mean, I think we all agree that the world is a much different place than when we were growing up. And like it or not, our kids are exposed to more and more at younger and younger ages. And it's not a question of if they're going to be exposed to something like pornography, but when. And so we as parents have a choice. Do we want them to learn from other perhaps unreliable sources, or do we want them to learn from us? And if we want them to learn from us, we need to start talking early.
And a lot of parents were not raised in that, so there is an uncomfortableness around
Of course.
sex, and there isn't that positivity. How does a parent overcome that and maybe educate themselves and make themselves more comfortable and open to sex in general?
Well, I wouldn't expect any parent to have the perfect answer to any question. And if a child asks a question and it's totally the wrong time, or a parent understandably has no idea how to respond, we don't have to answer right on the spot. We can take some time to formulate an answer.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm so glad you asked me that scientific question. Thanks for coming to me. I want to think about how best to answer it for you. Can we talk about it before bed, or when we get out of Save On Foods, or when our guests leave, right? So parents, I think, sometimes feel they have to just react right on the spot. But sometimes questions really do deserve some thinking before
Some
answering.
thoughtful, exactly. And I think there is that pressure to just say it perfectly right off the bat. But you know, you can sit with it and let your children sit with it as well. You raised a point that I wanted to get into that's so important. Is, you know, it's not a matter of when your child will see porn, or if. It's when they are going to see porn, and it's happening earlier and earlier, and so easily, thanks to phones and various access to screens. What impact does that have on somebody's look or attitude towards sex as they're seeing this, and how it can impact the way their sexual, you know, life and attitudes can develop?
Yeah, well, when we think about kids having their first exposure to sex in pornography, we're concerned, understandably, because pornography is not real sex. It's entertainment.
Right.
And so what can happen is they walk away from watching porn with all kinds of pressure, expectations, and pretty bold assumptions based on gender stereotypes that just aren't true in real life. And so we want them to know what a healthy, real sexual relationship looks like from learning from reliable sources, not from entertainment like pornography that is not intended for children to see.
No, it is not. And I think some parents might be surprised at how young children are able to view it. I know in our family that was a very eye-opening moment when we sort of casually asked our older daughter, I think she was in grade 6, you know, have you ever seen anything like this? And she was like, yes, the boys at school will show it to us at lunch and at recess.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it, but that's when I realized we really needed to step up.
And that's the thing, Amy, you know, we can set reasonable boundaries and guidelines around what our kids are consuming, but we can't control everything. We can't control what someone else shows them, or what they stumble upon on accident, or where their curiosity takes them. The bottom line, though, is we want them to know they can come to us. Yeah. Even if they broke a rule, if they saw something that made them feel uncomfortable or scared or disturbed, come and talk to us so we can help them make sense of it.
We'd love to have people call in to pick your brain and ask you some questions
Sure.
or share their experience. You can call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. We're joined today by sexual health educator Saleema Noon. She has a wealth of knowledge, so she can answer pretty much anything you can throw her way.
I'll try.
You have been advocating for sexual health and education for a very long time. What has changed as you've been doing this? Attitudes evolve, and the ages at which you are, I assume, introducing concepts to children has changed. What are some of the biggest key issues?
Yeah, and Amy, of course, we've been talking about some of the things that weren't an issue for kids 10, 15, 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I first started teaching. It's a completely different world, and they are exposed, especially online, to things we wish they weren't. Now, some things about what I teach, like puberty, that hasn't changed a lot.
No.
But more than ever, it's important for parents to start these conversations early because of how sexual health education in recent years, and especially in recent months, has become more and more of a sensitive topic. And as a result, some teachers and schools and school districts may shy away from it, even though it is mandated curriculum here in BC. And so parents need to take the reins, stay one step ahead of the game, and make sure their kids have the information and skills they need to make really smart decisions about their bodies and about their relationships and about their life growing up.
There's this sort of increasing push to limit screens or limit phones in schools, to limit access to them while they're at schools. Is there any concern that this could maybe lead parents to have sort of a false sense of security of how much access their children will still have?
Absolutely. Really, what I see the goal being is to teach our kids good habits. And there are certain places where phones are welcome and acceptable, and there are certain situations and environments where they're not. And by prohibiting phones in any given situation, we're not teaching that.
Right.
Now, having said that, I totally understand how teachers are increasingly frustrated by that distraction. Yes. So, definitely see that too. But it's about teaching good habits and good boundaries, because screens are not going away.
No.
They are increasingly part of our lives, even as part of our schoolwork. So we need to find a way to, get a healthy balance.
All right. We do have a call now from Michelle in Cowichan Bay. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi there.
What was your question for Saleema today?
So I just wanted to impress upon the discussions that we should be having, not just with younger kids, but also our older kids as well, and those who might be just starting to become sexually active. I know that the discussion has been sort of featured around talking to the younger kids, but, I think we tend as parents to just assume that our kids aren't doing anything, and if they are, we should be talking to them specifically about, proper relationship building and protecting yourselves, and not just from, being sexually active, but also from making sure that they understand that, some people might be sharing this information without their knowledge and those kinds of things, just to make them feel a little bit safer. So I'll leave it with your guest to discuss, and I'll hang up now.
All right. Thanks for that, Michelle. Incredibly.
I couldn't agree more.
Such a valid
point. The teaching and the talking and the learning should never end.
No.
Parents often say, though, that by the time their kids get to be teenagers, especially if they haven't done a lot of talking so far, every time they try to open their mouth, they're met with the eye rolls and the, I know, Mom. So we need to get a little bit creative in terms of how we start these conversations with our older kids. I remember with my own stepdaughters, who, as you know, are young adults now, I would start a conversation about something I wanted them to know about by saying something like, this might be a bit too much information at your age, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I know you're mature enough to handle it. And that kind of gets them engaged.
Ropes them right in.
Or do you have 3 minutes for me? So they know it's not going to be a long, drawn out, boring conversation. And I think with older kids, we also need to talk less and listen more. Let them be the expert. Let them teach us. So do many of kids your age come across pornography? Or is sending nudes really something that's a thing? And that way we can get them talking and keep them engaged that way.
Yeah, and it sort of gives them not a free pass, but sort of a way to allude to what they perhaps are seeing and experiencing, while not having to fully admit that, yes, I've seen pornography, but they can say, yes, I have friends that have seen.
Keeping the questions general increases the chances they're going to open up, because they don't feel like we're prying into their private life.
Right, or attacking or judging. We do have another call from Stephanie in Revelstoke. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi there. How are you?
Great. What's your question or comment today?
Actually, I have a comment. I just wanted to say, thanks to Saleema for being the great sexual educator she is. I lived in Vancouver for a long time.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I know Saleema's work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah, and I'm a holistic health practitioner, so I deal with a lot of sexual trauma in female adults and couples. So I'm doing a lot of education for adults. To be able to even talk about sex is not very easy, but there's a book that I wanted to recommend. A good friend of mine, Julia Saunders, wrote a book called Bodies, Boundaries, and Delight. And it's taking the opportunity that you have as a parent when you have a baby and you're bathing the baby and you're helping your kids get dressed from 0 to 5. So it's teaching kids about their bodies, about their boundaries from a very, very young. I just love what Julia Saunders says. She's a master's family sexual educator, and she's done, education programs for some of our provinces. And that's a really great book that I just wanted to advise parents towards. Like, if you're having a child, yes, starting earlier is the best. I've heard Saleema say, if you're starting when they're 13, that's too late. You got to start when they're developing, when they're learning about themselves, because you got to prepare them, because they are going to see a lot of stuff that you don't want them to see. It's just, you have to absolutely have that in mind.
That's the one constant. They're going to see something you don't want them to see, no matter what you do. But consent from such a young age is so important.
Absolutely. And to this caller, I want to thank them for their important work as well. Also, hello, Julia. Love you. She's a friend and colleague as well. But absolutely, there are, like Julia's book, so many print and online resources that parents can use as support these days. Yeah. Many more than when our kids were younger.
Oh, absolutely.
So I really want parents to understand they are not alone. They do have a B team, people like me, friends, the cool aunt, and these resources that really can help start these conversations and keep them going in a lighthearted and an entertaining way.
Yeah. Steve in Kelowna has a question or a comment. Hi, Steve.
Hi there.
What are your thoughts on talking to your kids about sex?
Well, I just wanted to share how my parents handled it. And I always thought it was a really effective way. I have 3 brothers and sisters as well. But the parents just left a copy of it's an old book now, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask. And they just left a copy of that on the recreation room bookshelf. And we were free to access it whenever we liked. And it was a good resource. I understand. I caught the tail end of the last call, so you were talking about those sorts of resources. I think it was a really effective way of approaching the topic without them having to have too many difficult conversations. We could go and find out for ourselves. And in this age of easy access to porn, I just wonder if that still isn't a really good way to go about this, and just allow the kids to be able to find out for themselves.
Yeah. No, there is something to be said for that sort of, not low stakes, but, low barrier to accessing it and seeing it.
Yes, that's right, Amy. And I'm not familiar with this book specifically, but I think the idea of leaving educational resources around the house for kids is awesome. I did it myself.
Yes.
And I think the other piece of the equation is representing ourselves as a credible source to go to with questions. So I hope that this caller and their siblings also felt comfortable coming home to their parents and
Right.
saying, hey, this came up at school today. What do you think? Or I read this in the book you gave us. I'm not quite sure I understand. Can you explain it to me? Because kids need a reliable adult to go to when things come up.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be a parent or a guardian. They just
No.
have to have that adult that will be honest with them and not judge. That is always key. Is,
Really
is
does
letting them
take a
feel
village.
comfortable. It really does take a village. And you, we've talked many times in the past. You are part of my village in that your programs at school greatly impacted how I talk to my children about sex and how they are so open. And I have found that the kids, younger kids, teens, they have a very open and accepting stance about sex, about sexuality, about gender fluidity. And sometimes I feel as a parent, I'm trying to catch up. So
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of parents, this is new. The language is new. It changes on a dime. And so there's no reason why we can't say to our kids, hey, I heard this word today. Can you tell me what it means? Or I sense it means this.
Right.
Am I on base?
is this a terrible thing to say in public?
Exactly. And they love educating us. Again, we do have so much to learn from them.
We really do, and I really do sense that there is a bit of a shift in just the way they prioritize themselves and have a whole language around consent and sex that I never had access to. So I think that's phenomenal.
And our willingness to learn more about their own world goes a long way.
It really does. Saleema, thank you so much. I wish
My
we had more
pleasure.
time, and we'll certainly have more calls and emails, but I really, really appreciate you coming in with us today.
Anytime.
Always great and always incredibly educational. That is sexual health educator Saleema Noon. You can still continue to send your questions via email. That is our show for today. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion. You can always email us bctoday@cbc.ca.